It's the Easter season again. And, you know, for a lot of us, it's a time where we're thinking about some pretty big ideas,
Yeah.
you know, about like sacrifice and new beginnings.
Right. Yeah, definitely. It's a time when, like, the death and resurrection of Jesus are really at the forefront.
Yeah, and like the whole concept of God's redemptive plan for humanity, which is a lot to unpack.
It is. It is. And actually, there's this writer, Sarai Ajai. She's got some really interesting things to say about this. In her work on Easter, she connects it to this really universal human experience.
Oh, really? What's that?
Well, she talks about how, like, alongside the whole idea of redemption, there's this theme of wrestling with identity and purpose, like who we are and what we're supposed to be doing with our lives, you know.
Oh, I see.
And she really ties this in with Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, you know, yet not as I will, but as you will.
Yeah, yeah. Powerful stuff.
So powerful. And it got us thinking, like, how does this idea of struggling with identity actually play out in the Bible?
Yeah, what a great question for this deep dive. So today we're going to explore some key figures from the Bible and see how their stories kind of shed light on this whole identity crisis thing. And we're going to be using Ajai's work as our main guide for this. So hopefully by the end, you'll walk away with like a deeper understanding of this shared human experience and maybe even some new insights into your own journey, you know, with identity and purpose and all that.
Yeah, it should be a good one.
Okay, so first up, we've got Moses. Now, according to Ajai, his story is all about like a total transformation of identity. Like he starts out as this, you know, Egyptian prince living the high life. He's got security, power, the whole nine yards.
Yeah, he's raised in Pharaoh's house, so he's got everything going for him.
But then things take a crazy turn. He ends up defending a Hebrew slave, and unfortunately, it leads to the death of an Egyptian. And that's it for him in Egypt.
Right, he has to flee. It's a complete upheaval of his world and everything he knows.
Imagine that, going from a prince to, you know, a shepherd in exile.
Yeah.
It's a huge drop in status. Like, who is he now? Ajay really focuses on this period in Midian. She says it must have been like a major internal struggle for him, a real wrestling match with his sense of self, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, think about it. He loses his position, his wealth, all those connections. He's basically stripped of everything that defined him.
Yeah. And he's forced to confront this like really basic question,
Right.
like, who am I, without all the fancy titles and stuff.
Exactly. Ajay suggests this exile was a kind of stripping away process, and it's often what happens before a big new calling.
And then, boom, he encounters the burning bush. God appears, right?
Right.
And gives him this massive task. Go back to Egypt and lead the Israelites out of slavery.
Talk about a 180.
I know, right? But what's really interesting is how Moses reacts. He doesn't just jump in and say, okay, great, let's do this. He's got questions.
Yeah, he's hesitant,
Yeah.
which makes sense.
Yeah, totally. He says to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Which Ajay says isn't just him being humble. It's deeper than that.
Yeah, it's more like, who am I now after all that's happened? He's looking at himself as a shepherd, not the prince he used to be.
Yeah, he's stuck between who he was and who he's supposed to become, right?
Right. He doesn't see himself as this leader God is calling him to be.
So how does God respond? Because that's key here, right?
Yeah, and Ajay points out something really important. God doesn't focus on Moses' past or promise him success in the future. Instead, he says, I will be with you.
Wow. Powerful. Simple, but powerful.
It is. And Ajay argues that this is what allows Moses to start understanding his true identity. It's not about his past or his current self-image. It's about God's calling and God's power working through him.
It's like a total shift in perspective.
It is. He goes from prince to servant leader, surrendering his doubts to embrace this bigger purpose.
Which, you know, ties in beautifully with the Easter theme of letting go of our own will and trusting in something larger than ourselves.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so let's move on to Gideon. Ajay says his story shows us a different side of the identity struggle, one that's all about a lack of self-confidence.
Yeah, God calls him to lead the Israelites against the Midianites, right? But Gideon is not feeling it at all.
No, not at all. He's hiding in a wine press, threshing wheat in secret. So he doesn't get caught by the Midianites.
Not the most heroic picture.
Not exactly right. And then the angel of the Lord shows up and says, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. And Gideon's response, well, it's a total reality check.
Yeah, he's like, hold on, how can I possibly save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least important person in my family.
Ouch. Talk about feeling inadequate.
Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah.
And Ajay points out that, unlike Moses, whose problem was a sudden change in status, Gideon's identity crisis is rooted in this deep feeling of not being good enough.
Yeah, he's defined by how he sees his family, like they're nobodies, and he's even worse.
Right. And Ajay uses this to show how much our social and cultural backgrounds can affect how we see ourselves.
So Gideon sees himself as a total zero, but God calls him a mighty warrior. That's a huge contrast. How does Ajay explain that?
She argues that Gideon's self-image is totally blocking him from fulfilling his potential, you know?
Yeah.
Like God sees him as this powerful leader, but Gideon can't even imagine it.
Because of his own limiting beliefs.
Exactly.
Like we get in our own way sometimes, right?
All the time. And God's calling often requires us to see ourselves differently, you know, to see ourselves as he sees us.
But God doesn't just ignore Gideon's feelings. He acknowledges them and says, "Go in the strength you have, am I not sending you?" It's so reassuring.
So reassuring. It's like he's saying, look, it's not about your own strength. It's about me empowering you.
It's about trusting in something beyond ourselves, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is kind of a recurring theme here, isn't it? Okay, let's talk about Esther. Ajay says her story presents a whole different kind of identity challenge.
Right. She's Jewish, but she becomes the queen of Persia without anyone knowing her true heritage.
It's like a secret identity.
Yeah. She's living this life of luxury and power, but she can't reveal who she really is.
That's got to be tough, like constantly living with this fear of being found out.
Definitely. It creates this real internal conflict for her. Her outward identity as queen gives her security, but it's at odds with her inner identity as a Jewish woman.
Yeah, it's a double life. So how does this tension play out?
Well, when there's a threat against the Jewish people, Esther's in a bind. She has to weigh her own safety against her responsibility to her people.
Right, because if she reveals herself, she could lose everything.
Exactly.
And then her cousin Mordecai sends her that message, the one that says, "Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." Talk about a powerful moment. How does Ajay interpret that?
She says it forces Esther to see her life in a new light. Like maybe becoming queen wasn't just chance. Maybe it was part of God's plan.
To use her position to help her people?
Yeah, exactly. Her identity as queen becomes secondary to her identity as a Jew.
She has to make a choice, right? To stay silent and safe, or to risk everything for a greater purpose.
And Ajay points out that this is something we can all relate to. We might be in comfortable positions, but sometimes God calls us to step out of those comfort zones and use our situations to serve a bigger cause.
And it takes trust, right? Trust that our lives aren't just random events, but part of a larger design.
Absolutely.
Okay, now let's talk about Jonah. His story is a little different. Ajay says his identity crisis is basically him rebelling against God.
Yeah, he's called to preach to Nineveh, right? But he's like, nope, not doing it. Gets on a ship and heads in the opposite direction.
He's running away from God's call. So why the resistance? What's Ajay's take?
She says it's a combination of fear and prejudice. Jonah's probably scared of what will happen if he goes to Nineveh. Plus, he might not even think they deserve God's mercy.
He doesn't want to do it. And well, you know what happens next? The big fish.
Right, he gets swallowed up. And Ajay sees this as a symbol of Jonah's inner struggle. Like he's trapped by his own stubbornness.
Yeah, he's literally stuck. And it forces him to face himself and his choices.
Exactly. He's powerless to change his situation. So he has to confront his own will and how it's clashing with God's plan.
It's a tough lesson, but Ajay says it's a necessary one.
It is. It's through this experience that Jonah starts to realize that his identity isn't about what he wants. It's about being a prophet who obeys God.
And in the end, he does go to Nineveh, and the whole city repents, which is pretty amazing, right?
Yeah, it is. And Ajay uses this to show that even when we resist God's call, we can still turn things around. And when we finally align ourselves with his will, incredible things can happen.
It's a powerful message of redemption, both for Jonah and for Nineveh.
Okay, last but not least, we've got Peter. He's a bit of a fan favorite, you know?
Yeah, he's so relatable.
Right. He's one of Jesus' closest disciples, but he's also got his flaws. And Ajay really focuses on his identity crisis during Jesus' trial. Yeah, he's all gung-ho at first. Says he'll never deny Jesus. But then, when things get real, he panics. Denies knowing Jesus 3 times.
Imagine the guilt he must have felt. Like he's supposed to be this rock-solid follower, but he cracks under pressure.
Yeah. Ajay says this must have been devastating for Peter's sense of self. His whole image of himself as a faithful disciple just crumbles.
He fails in such a public way, too. It's a total blow to his identity. But Ajay points out that the story doesn't end there.
Right. The resurrection changes everything. Jesus doesn't reject Peter for his denial. He forgives him.
And there's that scene where Jesus asks Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" It's like he's giving Peter a chance to redeem himself.
Exactly. He's giving Peter the opportunity to reaffirm his love and commitment, to redefine his identity, not by his past failure, but by his renewed faith.
It's such a beautiful moment of grace and restoration, and it sets the stage for Peter becoming a leader in the early church, right?
Exactly. Ajai argues that this forgiveness is crucial for Peter's future role. It shows us that our mistakes don't have to define us forever. God's grace can restore us and give us a new sense of purpose.
It's a message of hope for all of us, really. So we've got these five figures: Moses, Gideon, Esther, Jonah, and Peter. They all wrestle with their identities in different ways. And Ajay connects all of this back to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Right, she says this is where it all comes together. Jesus faces the ultimate test. His human desire to avoid suffering is going head to head with God's will for him.
And he prays, "Yet not as I will, but as you will." It's the ultimate surrender, isn't it?
It is. He knows what's coming. He knows the pain that awaits him. But he chooses to align himself with God's plan.
And when you look at the struggles of Moses, Gideon, Esther, Jonah, and Peter, they're all echoes of this same choice, aren't they?
Yeah. They all had to surrender their own desires and fears to embrace God's calling.
So maybe the Easter story isn't just about Christ's victory over death. Maybe it's also about aligning ourselves with a higher purpose, about surrendering our own will to God's will.
That's a really powerful insight from Ajay.
It is. And she reminds us that these biblical figures weren't perfect. They had doubts and struggles, just like us, but they still played vital roles in God's story.
Which is encouraging, right?
Totally. It means we can too, even with all our imperfections.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, what's the main takeaway for you, our listener? What can we learn from all of this?
I think Ajay's work shows us how universal this struggle with identity really is, and how it's okay to question and doubt, and even rebel sometimes. But ultimately, our true identity and fulfillment come from aligning ourselves with God's purpose for our lives.
Not our own limited self-perceptions, but his vision for who we can be.
Exactly. So here's a thought to leave you with. Think about times in your life when you've wrestled with who you are and what you're supposed to be doing. How can these stories and Jesus' ultimate sacrifice offer you a new perspective on your own journey of identity?
It's a good question to ponder, especially during this Easter season.
It is.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time.